Every morning at Balmoral Castle, the routine for the staff begins with a tradition that feels almost surreal. Maids are required to curtsy to empty rooms, even if the royal who had just been there has already left. The gesture isn't about who's physically present, it's about honoring the lingering spirit of royalty. This custom, which has been in place for over 150 years, has never been questioned or altered. But this strange ritual is only the tip of the iceberg when it comes to the strict and sometimes oppressive rules inside Balmoral. For instance, vacuum cleaners are forbidden. Instead, staff must spend hours on their knees scrubbing carpets with brushes, a task that leaves them exhausted. Many of these workers endure 18-hour shifts, yet are still paid less than the legal minimum wage. Even more stifling, they are prohibited from speaking unless a royal addresses them directly. One leaked review even described Balmoral's management as toxic. But beyond the harsh labor and silence, workers have whispered about something even darker within the estate, something that pushed dozens of employees to resign without hesitation. The history of Balmoral itself is rooted in secrecy. In the summer of 1852, Prince Albert discreetly sent $32,000 to purchase the property after spotting a rain-soaked advertisement. At the time, he didn't even inform Queen Victoria of the purchase. Adjusted for modern value, that sum would equal around $4.4 million today. Within only a few years, the old house on the land was demolished, and by 1856 a grand new granite castle stood in its place. Prince Albert personally involved himself in the project, even sketching the design for the clock tower. Over time, the royal family expanded the estate further, eventually stretching it to more than 53,000 acres, larger in size than San Francisco or Paris. The vast land included rugged mountains, around 150 buildings, its own private power supply, and even a 3-mile-long railway line constructed in 1866. The railway wasn't for visitors, it was specifically designed to secretly transport royal luggage. Despite its deep association with Britain, Balmoral isn't owned by the state, it belongs privately to the royal family. This means that any profits made from renting cottages or selling deer from the estate go directly into their pockets. Though members of Parliament voiced complaints about this arrangement, King Edward VII famously dismissed the criticisms, describing Balmoral as the family's inescapable refuge. The castle itself looks like something out of a Scottish fairy tale. Completed in 1856, its walls of gleaming white granite shimmer against the Highland backdrop. Prince Albert oversaw nearly every aspect of its design. He made sure the windows could open wide to let in fresh mountain air and had stone carvings of all 9 of his children etched above the doorway. The castle contains 167 rooms, but Albert insisted on keeping the hallways narrow to increase the chances of family members running into one another, believing this would foster closeness. The clock tower, inspired by a German castle, rings an E-flat to avoid startling the royal ponies. While some critics at the time claimed the castle resembled a giant coal barn, its style soon caught on. Within 20 years, as much as 80% of new country homes across Scotland were built in the same Balmoral-inspired design. For Queen Victoria, the castle was more than architecture. She once said Balmoral smelled of pine and freedom, a reflection of the sense of escape it gave her. When the royal family arrives at Balmoral, they never arrive alone. During the height of the hunting season, the estate fills with nearly 150 workers. Among them are gillies for hunting, horse handlers, cooks, cleaners, and even one man whose sole responsibility is to play the bagpipes every morning at 7 a.m. beneath the king's window. Every employee is required to sign a lifelong pledge of silence, promising never to reveal what they see or hear inside the estate. Breaking this rule means instant dismissal. Some maids work up to 18-hour days, tirelessly polishing hundreds of silver pieces and maintaining more than 50 fireplaces throughout the castle. Each season consumes around 60 tons of birchwood just to keep the fires burning. Mealtimes are simple, with royal picnics often held beside the river. Sometimes the king even does the dishes afterward. Yet the rules remain strict and unbending. Staff are still forbidden from speaking unless spoken to, and some workers are obligated to live on the grounds and participate in the annual cull of deer, with roughly 1 out of every 200 animals killed each winter. The wages for running Balmoral's estate add up to more than $3 million a year. Much of this expense is covered by revenue from timber sales and the rental of cottages to paying tourists. But despite the harshness of their duties, there is one night of the year when the lines between staff and royalty blur, the annual Gillies Ball. Since 1858, this event has brought everyone together in a rare atmosphere of joy and camaraderie. Beginning at 7 p.m., the ball opens with the king leading the first dance with one of the staff. On that night, even the lowest-ranking dishwasher may find themselves waltzing with a prince. Stories abound of lighter moments at these events. For instance, Prince Philip was once rumored to have slipped gin into the punch to liven the mood. Princess Diana once described the Gillies Ball as feeling like a mix between a high school prom and Downton Abbey. Yet even during the festivities, tradition looms large. Invitations are coded by rank, gold-edged ones for favored staff and plain ones for the rest. At midnight, the royal family departs, and the workers must bow in silence. In 1991, when a young footman revealed to the press a detail about a barefoot dance that took place at the ball, he was immediately fired. Since then, cameras have been strictly banned. Still, for many workers, the ball remains the highlight of their year, one of the few occasions where they are permitted to call the king by his first name. Because Balmoral is hidden deep in the mountains and accessible only by a long, single road, it has always been an ideal place for keeping royal secrets. Queen Victoria's unusually close friendship with her servant John Brown flourished there, far from prying eyes. Edward VIII rehearsed his abdication speech within its walls. After Princess Diana's death in 1997, Prince William and Prince Harry were sheltered at Balmoral, shielded from the devastating news for several hours to protect them. Still, secrets cannot always be contained. In 2019, a cleaner leaked photos of the royal children's treehouse, prompting the palace to ban photography altogether and cover the castle's windows for privacy. Years earlier, another staff member had sold private details about the family, such as the Queen Mother's fondness for Dubonnet and Prince Andrew's peculiar demand for exactly 28 golf balls, earning $90,000 before facing a lawsuit. Security has only tightened since then. In 2024, sky fences were installed to block drones from spying over the estate. Yet even with the barriers, whispers of what happens inside Balmoral continue to slip out. For the youngest staff members, the grueling days begin before dawn. At 6 a.m., maids gather in the oldest kitchens of the castle, polishing more than 200 pieces of silver until they gleam. Breakfast must be prepared and served by 8 o'clock sharp. Afterward, they spend the morning carrying heavy tea kettles down cold, echoing corridors, always moving quietly so as not to wake the royal dogs. Lunch prep includes peeling up to 18 kilograms of potatoes. Then the maids must change into fresh uniforms for afternoon tea at 4 o'clock. By evening, they are tasked with cleaning mud-caked boots from the royal hunting parties before retiring to cramped attic bedrooms by 9:45 p.m. These punishing 15-hour shifts come with no overtime pay, only a stark line written in the staff manual: loyalty is its own reward. As one former maid once said, working at Balmoral felt like giving your life to a shadow, with not even a simple thank you in return. Adding to the physical strain was the ban on vacuum cleaners, a rule enforced because Queen Elizabeth II despised their sound. This meant that each morning, 2 maids had to kneel and push small horsehair brushes across the thick carpets. Cleaning a single hallway could take 45 minutes. The dust collected so quickly that aprons had to be rinsed twice daily. In 1990, the head housekeeper admitted that this outdated practice added around 9 extra hours of labor to the staff's workload every day. Yet despite the increase in demands, their wages remained unchanged. Some maids said the repetitive brushing left their wrists so sore they could barely eat. But no one dared complain. Outwardly, the castle gleamed with perfection, yet beneath its polished surface, a quiet misery spread like dust under the rugs. The culture of silence at Balmoral was suffocating. Speaking out, or even listening, could get a worker punished. In July 1986, one maid was dusting nearby when she overheard Prince Charles whispering something to Princess Diana. Another servant immediately hissed at her to act deaf. The following morning, she was handed a formal written warning. The rule was clear: staff must never acknowledge anything said by a royal. A second offense meant termination and the loss of the $250 end-of-season bonus many relied on. To survive, workers developed a secret language of hand signals, especially during breakfast service. Some claimed the halls of Balmoral were quieter than a library, not out of respect, but out of fear. Every silence was an act of survival, every glance a reminder that someone was always watching. The pay did little to compensate for such conditions. In 1983, the lowest-ranking housemaid earned only $18,000 before taxes, just $4,000 more than the average British salary, despite working over 60 hours a week and living full-time at the castle. Conditions were primitive in some areas. Certain quarters still had outdated toilets, forcing maids to carry chamber pots. Promotion to first housemaid took 3 long years, and even then wages only rose to $21,500 annually. By comparison, male gamekeepers earned closer to $26,000. Unsurprisingly, many female staff members left after only a year. Royal historian Patrick Thorncroft later described the atmosphere this created as a quiet tension, never spoken aloud but always felt, like standing in the cold while wearing silk gloves. Among all the unusual rules, one in particular astonished new staff members. If a royal left a room, and a maid entered moments later, she was still required to curtsy to the empty space. This act symbolized honoring the spirit of the royal who had just been present. In 1987, during the Gillies Ball, staff ended up performing this ritual 61 times in a single evening. Some maids bruised their knees so badly from repeated curtsying that bandages had to be handed out with serving trays. One maid later described the practice as curtsying to ghosts, a haunting symbol of how tradition outweighed their dignity. In March 1988, the royal family faced a scandal when a French magazine published an exposé written by a young maid who had worked at Balmoral the previous summer. She had been paid around $10,000 for her story, more than she would have earned in 8 years of service. The details she revealed shocked the palace. She shared descriptions of dinner routines, intimate private moments, and even which dog slept near Princess Anne's room. Within 2 days, the UK tabloids picked up the story, and soon millions were reading about secrets meant to stay hidden. One anecdote she shared, however, painted the family in a surprisingly kind light. She described a formal dinner in August 1987 when a guest mistakenly drank from his finger bowl, confusing the rose-scented water for soup. Rather than embarrass him, Queen Elizabeth and the rest of the royal family quietly followed his lead, sipping their own bowls so he wouldn't feel ashamed. That evening, staff counted 17 empty finger bowls. To many, that simple act said more about the royals than any grand speech ever could. It revealed a family that, in private, would rather drink perfume than humiliate someone. Not all the maid's stories were flattering. She claimed that during Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher's 1987 visit, tensions were high. According to her, the Queen deliberately housed Thatcher not inside the castle, as was customary for honoured guests, but in a small, distant cottage on the estate. Among the staff, this spot was mockingly nicknamed Siberia. The palace swiftly denied the claim, insisting Thatcher always stayed in the castle. Still, some noticed the Prime Minister missed the next morning's grouse hunt, fueling rumors of a frosty relationship. The tabloids had a field day, portraying the situation as a silent power struggle between two of Britain's most powerful women. When it came to Charles and Diana, however, the maid painted a softer picture. She described them as resembling teenagers in love, often holding hands when they thought no one was watching. Charles would fetch Diana's coat for her before picnics, and Diana, in turn, would slip tips to the young stable boys in secret. Yet beneath these moments of tenderness lay the harsh reality of staff life. Housemaids earned only $75 a week, and sometimes their wages were delayed or unpaid. Breaks were dictated by the ring of a bell, just as they had been in the 19th century. Kindness may have lingered in the hallways, but outdated rules still governed the household. The royal household reacted with fury when the maid's story broke. Within hours, Buckingham Palace issued a blistering statement condemning it as a gross breach of trust. An internal investigation was immediately launched, reviewing the records of all 348 staff members who had worked the previous season. Security protocols were rewritten overnight. New hires faced more rigorous background checks and were required to sign strict secrecy agreements linked to the Official Secrets Act. Everyone understood the implication: if you spoke to the press, your career was finished. And yet, behind the rules and punishments, the royals themselves often displayed quirks that blurred the line between extravagance and simplicity. The maid recalled Christmas of 1990, when she watched Queen Elizabeth carefully fold used wrapping paper and store it in an old tin that had once held dog treats. She even saved a single lemon slice from her plate, remarking that it would be perfect for trout tomorrow. Some staff found these habits charming, while others saw them as bitterly ironic, wishing the Queen's frugality extended to their own paychecks. Prince Philip, meanwhile, treated dinner as a kind of game. Every evening at 8:15 sharp, he would fire off a series of rapid questions at the maids: how many grouse had been caught that day, or which villager had run off with the postmistress.